2025 was transformational because of the size of the disruptions that were taking place, but it was also on the fact that they were so big that companies had to actually say, this is the financial impact.
Engaging with the business, understanding those processes and using that as a way to measure some things and understand things in a quantified manner rather than just in a high, medium, low or kind of red, amber, green type labels.
This is a cultural and operational shift in how the government views resilience. Every leader, every public sector organisation, every supplier has a role to play. But actually, I think a lot of other companies can probably learn from this model as well. And it also enables you over time to look at what were some of those decisions we made in the past, and were those the right decisions, and have we seen the business value that we expected to get from them. So it becomes a completely different way of managing cyber as a risk, as opposed to cyber being seen as a hugely technical issue where it's just about how many products and which platforms you're using.
I've known you for some time now, and you've always been a vocal advocate for cyber risk quantification across quite a variety of different leadership roles, and now at Eraneos. What originally kind of drew you to that or set you on this path, and why has it become core to your work?
So yeah, I moved into leading IBM's cybersecurity business across Europe back in 2012, and then I took over a global security strategy, risk and compliance practice in 2019. And I set up the risk quantification practice in 2020. And that was really because we felt that cyber was a business risk, and business leaders needed to understand the potential business impact of cyber risk. And this was a way for us to engage with the business leaders and help CISOs engage with the business leaders. I now lead the Eraneos UK practice with a continued focus on cyber risk management. For me, it's really important that we help our clients how to assess, how to reduce, and how to manage the business impact of cyber, and using risk quantification as a way to help them make much better investment decisions.
Yeah, and I suppose that you mentioned investment there, putting numbers around things make those kind of trade-offs and kind of communication much easier, right?
Absolutely.
There's also a really core part to that. I think you talked about the communication there and the importance of being able to engage the business. Have you found it to be any advice or kind of learnings from your years of applying different risk quantification methodologies and kind of the results that you've seen, compared to qualitative kind of methods and things?
Well, I think it's one of those key challenges. It's helping business leaders understand cyber, but not in technical terms, and it's helping the technical teams explain why people should invest in the areas that they're focused on. And it's having a model that for me is objective and is able to really analyze what could be the potential business impact rather than having a much more subjective approach. And that's where, for me, red, amber, green is a real challenge, because I think it is generally in most organizations, it is completely subjective. And it's also a challenge because you end up with way too many reds, and you actually end up probably with some greens that probably should be reds. And it's really difficult to help the business leaders make the right business decisions as a result.
Yeah, gotcha. And that's before you try and add up colours, right? How many greens make an amber, how many ambers make a red, or vice versa. So, and one area where earlier in my career, I spent quite a lot of time with traffic lights and colours and things, both literally and figuratively in the transport sector, and the old government kind of IS1 risk assessment methodology was rooted in these kind of more qualitative approaches. Kind of recently in the last few weeks, at time of recording, the government's launched a new cyber action plan. you've not just been watching this evolve from the sidelines. It's been something that you've been working directly with in government departments and kind of implement kind of what is quite a major uplift in kind of risk assessment and risk management for government. For those who may not be familiar with the cyber action plan, what's the headline message and why does it matter right now?
Well, and for me, it's really interesting because I think it's relevant to other sectors, not just the public sector, and I'll explain a bit about that. But for me, what's really interesting is they said they've got 4 strategic objectives. They need to guide our action and help us to prioritize where we can have the greatest systemic impact on the current unacceptable level of cybersecurity and resilience risk faced by government. And I think that's really recognizing the challenge that the public sector has, but frankly, the commercial sector has as well. And the first objective is better visibility of cybersecurity and resilience risk. So it's really looking at how does better visibility underpin action and help us to prioritize where we can have the greatest impact. So for me, it's really important because it's a good example of this focus on objective risk assessment and helping leadership prioritize resources. I think the other thing that's really interesting for me is they say this is a cultural and operational shift in how the government views resilience. Every leader, every public sector organization, every supplier has a role to play. And so for me, it's relevant not just to the government organizations, but it's also relevant to commercial businesses that are suppliers to the public sector. But actually, I think a lot of other companies can probably learn from this model as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to agree with there. There's particularly kind of moving from reports that are too subjective, perhaps, into a more objective manner. So rather than by that, I suppose we're no longer talking about arguing the whether something should be a 3 or a 4, and perhaps with some pretty woolly kind of definitions for what those might mean. Into okay, well let's actually try and put some numbers behind this and some things that we can actually measure to reduce the uncertainty. And one of the things that I've found on that front is also that often organizations are doing some of that measurement already, and then maybe not intentionally, but kind of it getting thrown away in the fact that they've said, well, a 3 would be anything up to 5 million and a 4 would be anything above 5 million. Someone goes away and works out whether it's going to be 4.9 or 5.2. But then rather than just recording that as being the kind of the value, it's kind of abstracted into this kind of larger bucket that loses some of the nuance. So I think I agree with you that kind of objectivity around cyber risk quantification is a really great approach to take instead. Have you talked to, you talked about government there as well as commercial. We've been talking to CISOs before that started to present these risks to the board in a different way, and kind of what was the reaction there? What was the board's reaction?
Well, it's been really interesting. So we've had CEOs who have really seen this as a much more effective way of presenting to their colleagues on the board. So they've really understood the risks and the impact in a completely different way, because it's been talked about in financial terms, which of course is the model that they recognise. And for me, there's a really sort of basic example, and obviously it's back a few years, but for me, WannaCry in the NHS was a great example of where a risk decision had been made allegedly on the basis that they'd said, we're not going to patch computers, we're going to focus on patients and medicine. And I think we can kind of understand that culturally, but of course, for me, they hadn't thought about what was the real risk impact of that. And if we'd used risk quantification back in 2017, I believe that we could have proved that it was going to generate a business risk of, say, £20 million. And I just think that would have gone up levels of management. If it was going to be it could cost us 20 million, then I think it would have gone up, and some senior people would have gone, okay, maybe we do need to invest in this. But obviously the next question would be, and how much is it going to cost us to reduce that risk? Now, of course, WannaCry ended up costing 160 plus million pounds. And I'm not necessarily saying that risk quantification is always going to be able to predict it that accurately. But for me, it's that 20 million, and it's going up through the leadership team, and people being able to make the right decisions about investment as a result of talking about the potential business impact in a reasonably accurate way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back into one of the main pillars of the cyber action plan, right? Around accountability. There needs to be better visibility, as you were saying, of cyber risk, particularly government-wide kind of cyber risks. But then, there also needs to be some central accountability for things that span multiple departments or organizations, appreciating that, like you say, this is quite a complex web of how public services are delivered nowadays. So, that there's a certain role for government to play there, where organizations can't be reasonably expected to kind of manage on their own, and it's a wider kind of team effort, right?
Yeah, but I think it is a cultural challenge. What was really interesting was we delivered for a CISO who then went to talk to his colleagues, and this was in the banking sector. But for me, it's a really interesting example, because the colleagues said, "Hey, welcome! You guys have finally joined us, because we've been modeling risk in operations, in credit, in finance, etc., for 15, 20 years. But you guys in IT have basically said, no, we can't do that. And finally, you've now got this model that allows you to do that." Now, obviously, that makes a lot of sense in the banking sector, but I still think it is relevant in lots of other sectors as well. It's how do you manage cyber risk, and how do you integrate it also into enterprise risk management?
Yeah. And so some of the work that you've been doing then is on that exact shift, right? Do you have maybe from that financial services example or other recent kind of client engagements on how changing the language to financial risk changed the outcome that you were able to achieve?
Yeah, so I had a team delivering a security strategy assessment for a UK government department. And inevitably, that was coming up with, these are the actions that need to take place. These are the things that we need to improve. And it was quite a long list of things to be acted on. And so inevitably, the next question was, so how are we going to build the business case for doing that? So we then used risk quantification to do two things fundamentally. One was to prioritize that long list of actions. And then secondly, it was also to build the business case for, what would be the business impact and what was the right areas to invest in. And that then got presented to a central government team, and they said, wow, this is the best business case we've ever seen for investing in cybersecurity. So it's using it to help prioritize what can often be many activities. But secondly, it's also building that business case for investment that makes it a lot easier to get that investment from the decision makers.
Great. Would you mind digging into a little bit? So starting with the prioritization there, how was, if we kind of take a slightly closer look at that, was that kind of looking at an annualized number, or, how would it compare to if people have, coming from a kind of qualitative background, or, you've got red, amber, greens, or maybe there are, things have been scored by multiplying, 1 to 5 by 1 to 5. So you've got a score somewhere between 1 and 25. How would you, what are some of the differences there, and what are some of the benefits when it comes to that prioritization?
Yeah, so well, it's looking at an annualized loss exposure. So it's basically assessing what could be the financial impact of that business disruption. And again, for me, this is really important because it's unique to that organization. It's an assessment based on that organization. And one of the things that gets a lot of positive feedback from CEOs, for instance, is when they see these numbers, inevitably they say, well, where did these numbers come from? And when you can say, well, this number came from your plant manager, your process owner, because we did a workshop with them, they were able to tell us, well, if we lost this particular business function, then this would be the impact. It's bringing together the business owners, the business process owners, and the IT security team to actually be talking the same language, and then being able to present that to the leadership team.
So a few things there then. So one is that you're able to consider, it's not to say that everything must happen every year or whatever. You're able to account for the fact that, this might be, well, hopefully lots of things, especially more serious ones, aren't annual occurrences, but it's kind of apportioning that over a sensible time period. And I like what you were saying there about cybersecurity. We often talk about, going out and engaging with the business and being about a business enabler. And this is a really good way of going out and engaging teams and understanding more about how they work, but also building credibility upwards as well. Right? Yeah. You're not kind of distilling it down to a 3 or a 17 or something like that. You're able to actually put some pounds and pence or some dollars and cents around it. I'm sure kind of goes a long way. And then the other side on the investment case, then we've got a nice kind of prioritized list of risk scenarios now. Arbitrarily, 10 million, 9 million, 8 million, 7 million, down to 1 million, just to keep things easy. And then on that investment case side, how do you go about that then? How does that end up being hailed as being the best investment case they've ever seen? What do you need to do to take that prioritized list and turn it into something that you can use to make a decision on?
Yeah, so basically what we've done is we've assessed the risk. We then built a list of activities in terms of how do you reduce that risk. But obviously the key challenge is then how do you manage that risk? And so that's really about having clarity in the organization about what is the risk appetite. And that's one of the things that the government cyber action plan talks about, is organizations have got to really think about what is their cyber risk appetite. So it's then making options that can then be made in terms of, what are you going to do? Are you going to accept that risk? And obviously there are going to be some risks that yeah, okay, but we still, the business benefits we get from that process are way more important, and that business impact is something that we can accept. There's going to be others that they definitely want to mitigate. So these are the actions that we're going to do. There may be some other options. Cyber insurance obviously provides one way as well of helping manage some of that risk. But also there are going to be some interesting decisions. If you've got some critical suppliers that are going to have potential disruptive impact, the question then comes, is procurement actually thinking about the supply chain in the right way? And are there some decisions that need to be made about some of those suppliers? And then obviously it's engaging with the suppliers to actually say, where are you? What are you doing to become more cyber resilient?
Gotcha. And then ultimately, so I suppose if we're looking at procuring a solution, that gives the other side to that investment case, then, doesn't it? So if we've got a £5 million annualized risk, and you're looking at a £1 million solution to address that and hopefully to treat it appropriately, then that's where you've got the real solid ground for making a clear investment case, right? Because you're saying we're going to reduce, essentially a net kind of cost reduction for the business of £4 million at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that then also it gives you a return on investment for the decisions that are being made, and it also enables you over time to look at what were some of those decisions we made in the past, and were those the right decisions, and have we seen the business value that we expected to get from them. So it becomes a completely different way of managing cyber as a risk, as opposed to cyber being seen as a hugely technical issue where it's just about how many products and which platforms you're using.
Gotcha.
So it's a very different way of communicating, and as I've already mentioned, talking about communicating to the business leaders and the boards. But one of the other areas that is important for me as well is it's, for instance, helping IT and OT communicate to each other. And I think this is another good way of doing that as well, because again, it's not talking about it in technical terms, it's talking about the business impact, and both teams recognize that's what their business leaders really value.
Yeah, and those kind of operational technology, those OT teams are often kind of fairly well FA on, like you say, the processes that they're overseeing, and how those what those impacts might be of an outage, and kind of how to consider things in safety cases. I guess sticking in a kind of adjacent kind of space from a manufacturing perspective, we saw some pretty big cyber attacks in 2025 with the likes of Jaguar Land Rover and Marks and Spencer, and talking about the financial impact from those cyber incidents. Do you think that well, I'm going to assume the answer is you think that this will change how other companies start to approach risk, and maybe phrase it as how do you think this will change how other organizations start to approach cyber risk?
Well, I think 2025 was transformational because of the size of the disruptions that were taking place, but it was also on the fact that they were so big that companies had to actually say, this is the financial impact. So, Jaguar Land Rover, Marks and Spencer's, Co-op, etc., they've all had to say, this is how much the financial impact was, and they've had to report that to the boards, and publish that. So, for me, that's one of the things that other companies need to learn. So if that's how big it really could be, then let's go and actually try and assess what that would be, try and understand what would be the activities that we could do to reduce that risk so that we don't have a Jaguar Land Rover or Marks and Spencer's experience. So that's, for me, is why this is so important for people to learn from those two experiences. And what we all don't want to have is that, in 2026, we're seeing even bigger disruptions across sectors. And obviously, one of the other things that's interesting is both Jaguar Land Rover and Marks and Spencer's were partly as a result of supply chain issues. And so it's important that we learn from that as well.
And that's one of the key pillars in the action plan as well, right? Addressing that kind of severe and complex risk, if you like, in the supply chain. And obviously, we won't surprise people that a car manufacturing business kind of notoriously has a large, complex supply chain. Same goes with retailers offering, particularly groceries and things like that. In the case of Co-op and Marks and Spencer's, there's lots of from farm to fork, kind of lots of different parties involved in that supply chain. We know that this can affect government suppliers directly, but I guess how much will depend on the particular industry and how that. Any thoughts on how exactly you expect that to kind of filter down into the wider market?
Well, again, the government cyber action plan is very clear. Every supplier that delivers for government holds some cyber risk. And they're basically saying to the departments they must apply mechanisms to ensure suppliers appropriately manage government risks. So the two departments that have already been quite proactive in this, so both the NHS and the Ministry of Defence have both sent out letters to the CEOs of their suppliers in the past, basically said to the CEOs of their suppliers, we need you to be focused on cyber resilience. and please send this letter to the CEOs of your suppliers, because obviously it's not just immediate suppliers, it's second, third, fourth level of suppliers can also have impact. So it's really important that the organizations, both in the public sector but also in the private sector, are focused on this. And the private sector, if they want to be have the public sector as customers, need to be active in this space. And there are various actions coming out from different departments asking their suppliers to do different levels of commitment. But there's also now in the government cyber action plan, there's a focus on what are the strategic suppliers to the department, but also what are all the suppliers, and really understanding how are we going to manage that. So for me, it's a good thing actually, because the government is going to be driving more cyber resilience into quite a bit of the economy by insisting that all of its supply chain do so. But I would recommend to companies that aren't necessarily interacting with the public sector that they should be thinking along very similar lines.
I think there's it's interesting to see, like you say, at some pretty senior levels, and the kind of comms that are going out here. We talk about cyber needing a seat at the top table, and sending letters to all of the CEOs of your suppliers is definitely showing some strategic intent there. And as you say, there's kind of a bit of aggregation risk, I suppose, around some really key strategic suppliers as well. I'm thinking kind of, cloud providers always get trotted out in terms of, AWS but if you think about desktop operating systems for Microsoft and so on as well, there's a few there that lots will be relying on. The opportunity to I suppose government will still retain a lot of that risk. It's not that it's transferring it down to its suppliers. So it's more about balancing the equation at that point, isn't it? And making sure that they're doing kind of the commensurate activities and making appropriate investments, do you think?
Yes. But again, for me, it's a cultural piece. It's a communication piece. It's making sure that people in both organizations are making the right investment decisions and understanding what could be the impact. So these are the conversations that need to be taking place. So it's not, I don't think just compliance and ticking boxes is the right way to do this. It is much more about the customer understanding what could be the potential impact of that supplier being disrupted, and for the supplier, it's understanding what could be the potential impact to its customers as a result of it being taken out. So those are very different discussions that need to take place.
Yeah, much more than just like you say, tell us if you've got MFA, tell us if you've got a security policy, tell us if you've got a response plan, but actually using that to communicate the risk that you're associating with the delivery of this service, and asking what a supplier can do about it, I think is a really mature step towards where to get to. I suppose as we approach the end of this episode, for all kind of security leaders or kind of aspiring security leaders that are listening to this and want to align with this new action plan and a lot of the recommendations that are in it, what is one step that they should take tomorrow in order to kind of get a head start?
Well, I think one of the key things is moving away from subjective reporting and really starting to measure what would be the financial impact of cyber disrupting core business processes. So really understanding which are those core business processes and how well protected are they, and then building a list of activities that need to be done to reduce that risk. And then over time, it's going to be a case of managing that, because risk is going to constantly evolve in terms of, particularly unfortunately, with the geopolitics of the world at the moment. But for me, it's also, unfortunately, when ransomware is paid, it just motivates more criminals to move into this space. So unfortunately, it's not going to go away, in my opinion. So it's moving to a way of really thinking about cyber risk, and then managing cyber risk.
So understand. Sorry, go on.
Well, and then I was going to say, it's also about understanding that it's not just inside your own organization. You need to think about your suppliers, and you need to think about your customers, and what are the business risk impact for both of them as well. And pretty well everybody is a supplier to somebody or a customer to somebody, and therefore it's a really important conversation to be taking place.
Yeah, what's your role in the chain, I suppose, from top to bottom? But yeah, I think some really clear advice there around engaging with the business, understanding those processes, and using that as a way to measure some things and understand things in a quantified manner, rather than just in a just with high, medium, low, or kind of red, amber, green type labels. I think that's some pretty clear steps to take, and gives you some really solid foundations for then moving into that more kind of quantified risk assessment space.
Absolutely.
Julian, thank you ever so much for your time today. It's been great to catch up and talk through this matter with you. There's obviously a lot of work to do, as you say. I think the government action plan is the response to some National Audit Office reports that were quite damning in places about progress that was being made, and it's good to see it getting appropriate kind of attention and kind of focus for where to come next. And I think you're absolutely right to call out where there are parallels here that commercial organisations can be picking up and learning from, whether they're in that public sector supply chain or not.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you ever so much for your time today, and thank you for listening to another episode of Communicating Cyber.